Tonkin Gulf Resolution. While President Kennedy had supported sending military advisors to South Vietnam, it was President Johnson that would first send U.S. soldiers to fight in Vietnam. When President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, Lyndon B. Johnson became president. President Johnson did not want to see South Vietnam become communist. In August of 1964, reports were issued that said that the North Vietnamese patrol boats had fired on U.S. ships stationed in the Gulf of Tonkin. The ships were not damaged, but Johnson used this as an excuse to ask Congress for power to take all measures necessary to repel and prevent armed attacks on the U.S. Congress voted 88-2 to give President Johnson war powers. Basically, the president now had the ability to wage war without congressional approval or a vote. He had a blank check to do whatever he considered necessary to keep communists from taking over South Vietnam. Johnson started sending the first U.S. combat troops in March of 1965 to fight in Vietnam. He appointed General William Westmoreland to be the commander in Vietnam. Each year, more troops were sent. By 1968, there were 538,000 American troops in Vietnam. Tactics of the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong. U.S. soldiers soon discovered that the war would be fought very differently in Vietnam. First, it was very difficult to tell who was friendly South Vietnamese and who was the enemy, the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong didn't wear uniforms and would pretend to be friendly to troops. Since the United States had superior air power and was well stocked to fight a conventional war, the Viet Cong decided to use guerrilla tactics instead. The Viet Cong hid in the jungles and used surprise attacks against American troops. They used homemade weapons such as booby traps and mines, which they made from dead American bombs. They also created punjai traps, which were sharp spikes hidden in pits that were often contaminated to cause infection. The North Vietnamese Army supplied the Viet Cong and transported these supplies through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The North Vietnamese Army used the Ho Chi Minh Trail to get into South Vietnam. It was a series of small roads, paths, and tunnels that connected North Vietnam to South Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia. Tunnels were also used as training grounds, logistics centers, and sanctuaries. For instance, the Chu Chi Tunnel stretched 20 miles from South Vietnam's capital of Saigon and had 200 miles of tunnels. Many of the tunnels remained hidden until after the war. Here you can see how complex the tunnel system was, and here's one example of an entrance in that would have been covered over with leaves as well.